Yeah? Yep.
Hello, everyone. Too loud? Loud
Good,
enough?
you're good.
Okay. It's after 2:15, so just out of respect for scheduling, we'll go ahead and get started. People can come in as we're talking, that's all good. I have the privilege of introducing our Continuing the Conversation session, working towards equity and historic preservation. My name is Lindsey Wallace. I'm a senior architectural historian and planner at 106 Group, which is headquartered in St. Paul. So I'm just going to do the quick introduction part and then hand it off to my colleagues. So just to run through this, and then we'll introduce my colleagues up here. We're just going to spend a brief intro here for about 15 minutes going over some definitions, so we level set as the conversation proceeds. We're going to have a recap from the 2022 session, which I'm hoping, and perhaps some of you attended last year. Talk about the progress since last year, get into the statewide preservation plan. We're framing our conversation somewhat around goal 3 from that. And then we'll talk about the ground rules for the conversation, because what we want to do today is spend most of today in groups talking. So there will be 45 minutes for a facilitated breakout conversation, so we'll guide you through that. It's not a free-for-all, you're not alone out to sea, but it's a chance for us to just really dive into stuff in a safe space and talk to each other about our goals on this topic. And then at the very end, we'll do a report out and a wrap up. It's very important to us that we have some actionable items and some kind of reflection back to you all about this work that we're doing together today. So, introductions. I already introduced myself. I'm going to gracefully hand this to my colleagues.
Completely graceful. I am Barbara Mitchell-Howard. You might know me from the time I spent at SHPO. I am currently a part-time historian with the Minnesota Department of Transportation. I'm also the chair of the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission and a trainer for the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions and 5 million other hats, including my own business. I'm trying to repivot, so lots of hats.
Hi everyone, my name is Erin Kay, and I am a city planner in the historic preservation section of the City of Minneapolis Planning Department. I'm also a former consultant with 106 Group.
I am Ginny Way. I'm the National Register Architectural Historian at the State Historic Preservation Office, and I only do the one thing, but I do it really well. Thank you.
I'm going to hold this and let whoever's next put it back in the stand. That's cool. Okay. I also want to point out our lovely conversation note takers who have gracefully, we are grateful for their volunteering to do this. If you just don't mind raising your hand, Erin Hannafenberg from Rethos, up here in the front, Chris Homberding in the back, 106 Group, Lucy Harrington with SHPO right there, and Nicole Foss from SHPO there. Wonderful. So they will be helping us guide through the conversation part of this presentation. But before we get to that, we just wanted to level set with a few definitions. Many of you are probably familiar with these terms, but we wanted to lay down some specific definitions so you know what we're talking about when we talk about these words today. So BIPOC is an acronym that many of you are probably familiar with or have at least heard. It stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. Just as a note for this, one of the things we wanted to say as we bring this up, that this term may not be how every individual that may identify in these groups might see themselves or use that term. So just know it's not a catch-all, it's not universally a wanted term, but it is one that is widely known. So just putting that out there. Diversity, so in this context, we're talking about the presence of differences among people, ideas, backgrounds, and perspectives. And we have some examples there. Hopefully you're familiar. And with inclusion, I really liked how Bonnie brought this up in her presentation because it hits right on what we've talked about in this list here, which is about being welcoming to all people, regardless of their backgrounds, and then creating a setting for a sense of belonging, for building and fostering that sense of belonging. It's about valuing and respecting all people and ideas in a conversation or anytime, and having awareness of biases and privilege. Kind of a partner to that word is belonging, so that's a subjective feeling of inclusion or acceptance by a group of people. We wanted to include that to note that you may be trying to be as inclusive as possible, you may be working through that, but if the people you're inviting to the table don't feel a sense of belonging, it's a good time to switch up what you're doing and try to figure out how to engender that sense of belonging. And then accessibility, so the practice of making information, activities, and/or environments sensible, meaningful and usable for as many people as possible. So that's physical accessibility, which is what I think we usually think of when we think of that term, but also just information, right? So we work in a field that has a lot of terms, a lot of terminology, a lot of rules, but it should be democratized. People should be able to understand and to engage in the process as people of the country. Equity is ensuring that access, resources, and opportunities are provided for all to succeed and grow. So in this graphic, of course, equality means giving everybody the same thing, whereas equity is about tailoring to specific needs so that people can achieve to their best ability. So after that level set, pass it on to Erin.
So last year, I, along with some other professionals, including a few folks in the room, presented a session called Diversifying History, How Do We Make the Historic Preservation Process More Inclusive and Accessible? So by show of hands, was anyone able to attend that last year? Okay, we got a few. We want you to know that attendance last year is not a prerequisite for today, so we're glad to have you here and really expand that table with you, and I'm going to go over a few high points. I couldn't be more grateful to be following Bonnie McDonald's keynote because I think she teed us up really well for what we're going to do today. So one of the key things we identified last year is that the majority of places and stories represented on the National Register, the State Register, local landmark lists in Minnesota and nationwide are associated with white and Euro-Americans and often male. And so we wanted to go over challenges to addressing this problem and also highlight opportunities. So I'm going to share some of the challenges today, and then we're going to get into the opportunities in our breakout conversation. So what are some of these challenges? I think Bonnie hit on this a lot. This emphasis or perhaps overemphasis on architectural integrity. And I think she provided some great reasons how that becomes an issue. The 50-year guideline from the National Register may prevent us from acknowledging places that have achieved their significance more recently. It's a big hurdle to overcome. There may be archival absences in quote-unquote traditional repositories, the places that historians are often going to, and so you're not finding information about lesser known stories, or maybe that information is found in other formats or elsewhere, as the Rethinking I-94 group talked about this morning. There may be a lack of trust from these underrepresented or really historically overlooked communities, and a need for relationship building and community engagement, which I think was also highlighted this morning. And a key thing that I hope resonates with you is the phrase, nothing about us without us. You really want to be intentional about how you're involving the people whose story is being told. Preservation is often reactive instead of proactive, so that might not come into play until demolition is on the table, and that might be too late. So how do we think about having that conversation sooner? And then also a need for greater engagement with younger generations to help sustain our industry, to get more folks, get diverse folks into the room, helping to contribute to this effort. And one more piece that we did not talk about last year, but I think is still relevant, is that preservation professionals might not reflect the diversity of the communities in which we work. Bonnie said that phrase, you cannot be what you cannot see, and I think that really rings true. So how do we bring, again, more folks with different perspectives, different experiences into this to be able to then tell more of these stories? So as we were preparing for this session, we were reflecting on, what has changed since last year when we first brought this up. And at the national level, I think we're seeing a few things in terms of changes and updates to documentation, whether it's the new draft of the National Register Bulletin about traditional cultural properties. That was released earlier this year. I'm not sure when the final draft will come out. The Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation might be revised. That might be an opportunity to change practices. The National Alliance of Preservation Commissions released a messaging guide, and there are specific sections about equity and terminology that you may or may not want to be using as you're talking about this. And then the Preservation Principles or Priorities Task Force has released an issue brief, including one on diversity, inclusion, and racial justice. And we'd be happy to share some of these resources with you after the session if you're interested. But how about in Minnesota? So these again are just a few things that we're seeing, and we hope that you'll use the space in our breakout conversations to talk about more that you've encountered or that you've been working on in your own communities. So we want to highlight that 2 National Register nominations in the past year are associated with BIPOC communities. So that is contributing to the solution. We've been noticing identification and evaluation efforts of stories that may not have been looked at before through cultural resource studies and contexts. Thinking again about the I-94 group this morning, as well as many other studies that you folks may have been working on. We're seeing more community-led efforts to identify historic places and associations to existing historic places, so people are really taking ownership of their stories, their heritage, and what they want to preserve. Seeing more attention in the media through articles, news stories, especially about BIPOC and or LGBTQIA+ histories. And then a shout out to the Mapping Prejudice folks. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but they help identify racially restrictive covenants and deeds and then connect homeowners to resources to be able to remove that. And then one more thing that we wanted to share is that since last year, a group of preservation professionals have been meeting informally, monthly, to really talk about this, try to break down silos, reach across different roles in the industry to talk about DEI. We've been calling it a DEI think tank. We've been sharing resources and talking about actions, which is what brought us here. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
So historic preservation with a big H, big P is a set of rules that have been passed down from the National Park Service to us at the SHPO, to you as professionals, and in order to justify some of our work, whether it's to spend our time or our treasure in supporting some of these things, we need to fit within that framework. So the Historic Preservation Plan, which is a statewide plan that the State Historic Preservation Office creates every 10 years, updates between those 10 every 5, is a framework that is created by SHPO, approved by the National Park Service, but is written in collaboration with all y'all and lots of people outside of this room to talk about the priorities for the state moving forward. The goal from the Statewide Preservation Plan 3, which was published a few years ago and is available on the table outside, talks about the advance of equity, expansion of access, and increased diversity, and to foster inclusion within historic preservation. And I'm grateful for Bonnie and her talk today that talked about specifically about registration and designation of these places, and I am, being the National Register Coordinator, very excited about bringing those stories forward. However, I want you to know that the SHPO and the National Park Service, by approving this plan, has discussed diversity, equity, and inclusion in a much broader manner. These five points under Goal 3 are about hiring practices, they're about education practices, they are about context, they are about all of the challenging work that it will take in order to make our profession more diverse, not just in the people, the stories we represent, but also in tackling our own unconscious bias and privilege, and in moving that forward throughout the preservation practice as a whole. So when we're talking in our small groups in a little bit, I want to challenge you to think outside sort of the regulatory box. And I love rules, and if you talk to me with my National Register hat on, we'll talk about criteria and things, but today let's talk about how do we get more people in, how do we diversify our work, and know that you're supported by both the SHPO and the National Park Service when you do this work. So if you have to tell a boss why you're going to spend 25 minutes at the DEI think tank next month, this is why. Oh, I have to push a button. I don't know which button to push.
I'll do it. Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
We are going to move to our breakout conversations, but we're breaking out into 4 groups. We're going to go with it depending on who's here. Can I get a show of hands who is a government staff employee? Excellent, okay. How about Heritage Preservation Commissioners? Okay, great. Consultants? Excellent. And nonprofit staff? Oh, great. Got a nice balance, guys. This is going to work. Okay, so we are going to break out into these 4 groups. If you're in the government staff, you're going to be with Erin. She's going to facilitate your conversation. Barbara will, she'll be up here in just a second. will facilitate Heritage Preservation Commissioners' conversations. I will meet with consultants, and Ginny will be with nonprofit staff. Our overarching goals with the breakouts, we have questions, will be facilitated, is for you to share observations, reflections, and ideas. Nothing's too small, nothing's too big. We just want to hear what you have to say. And also to identify potential action items. You don't have to leave here and go do something right away just because you were in the session, but we do want to lead to that point. We want to do something. So that's part of the conversation. All right.
Lindsey, what if you're not in one of those categories?
If you're not in one of those groups, anybody who's not represented in one of those four, you can pick where you want to go. I mean, anybody can really if you would like to, but we'd like to kind of hear sector by sector. Awesome.
Before we get started on the breakouts, we're going to set some ground rules. And I want you to be looking at these with the idea that you're going to accept them after we go through them today. So the first thing I want everyone to do is listen. Listen actively. Don't just watch people talk. Listen to what they're saying. If you feel like you want to interrupt, pause, step back. Don't interrupt. Let them finish what they're talking about. I want you to speak from your own experience. You can't speak for everybody else. I could try to speak for everyone from DOT. There's no way I can do that. Speak from your own experience, what you've experienced, what you see, and what you want to see in the future. Again, step up and step back. If you're finding that you're taking over a space, again, pause, step back. But if you're seeing other people who aren't able to speak, and maybe you can tell they want to speak, try to help lift people up and see if they can express what they want to express. Acknowledge your privilege. We hear a lot about privilege today. We all have privilege of some sort. Think of that as you're talking. Hold each other accountable. If you see anyone breaking ground rules, you might want to say, hey, let's step back, let them finish. The goal is not to agree. We're not going to agree. I'm sure that there are things we're going to disagree about. But you want to have a deeper understanding of what all of the other people at the table are actually talking about. And then be conscious of body language and nonverbal responses. I'm the worst at this. I do not have a poker face. I miss having my mask on all the time because people never could see my mouth. But try to be conscious of your body language and all of your nonverbals while you're in the conversation. Is this something that all of you can agree to? And is there anything missing? I'm not seeing anything missing. Does everyone agree to these ground rules? I see head nods. Yes. Lots of them. Great. Thank you.
Okay. We'll direct people.
So if you are with consultants, why don't you meet Chris and I in the back there? If you're with nonprofits, why don't you come up here where Erin is? Government staff, maybe on this side. Is that okay? Over here. And then Heritage Preservation Commission over by the water area. Cool. Okay. See you back at 45.
One of those are 3 questions. Just realized.
This table.
My apologies.
Team member, your man Kato.
See, our HBC commissioners are still chatting, so I'm going to give you one more minute. Talk amongst yourselves. Keep sharing ideas.
I'll take a mile. Okay.
You want to do this? I think we'll just verbally you'll share, but we'll keep those.
All right, thank you all. For our report out here, we're going to ask each of the groups to potentially share just 1 to 2 takeaways from the conversation. I know that won't cover everything, but I'm going to bring the mic around so that everyone can hear. And I'm going to ask my group, the government staff group, and my friend Lucy here to go first.
We have a lot of notes.
Just 1 to 2, because we're running out of time.
1 to 2. I'm going to summarize that we said focus on historic preservation through community engagement, and there are grants and maybe nonprofit organizations that can help with this kind of thing.
Awesome. Wow, really great group over here, a little biased. Now we'll go to our nonprofit friends.
We have the solutions.
Nonprofits say that government should do it all. No. So one of the things that we identified as one of our greatest challenges and the things that we need to work on in order to make DEI more pervasive in preservation is that we need to create lasting, authentic relationships in communities. So it's not just about going in and identifying historic places. We need to make sure that that is a lasting and supportive relationship so that they can apply for grants as they feel comfortable and they feel excited to do so. That's it.
And lots of other.
Thank you. Another great group. We'll go to our HBC commissioners. Never felt more like Vanna White.
We were a small but mighty group. And we have 5 million notes. I don't know that I'm going to be able to summarize it, but one of the big things that we talked about for the first half of our discussion is just how do we reach out to more diverse communities? How do we get information out? How do we get our commissions to be more diverse? And we did come up with a few ideas on how we can probably do that better. And then another thing that we talked about just toward the end, which is, I'm not going to.
Yell it out, Barbara, I can't wait.
I'll use my big voice. We were just talking about how it's, we are very much a regulatory, the preservation commissions are very regulatory, but how can we start to look at things like intangible heritage and the communities and how we preserve that community sense that's associated with the building, that's associated with the history of the diverse communities within our city.
It's not working anymore then. Consultants with your biggest voice.
I will try. I don't know if I have a big voice. We had 4 takeaways. I'll sort of merge them together to 2. One was thinking about sort of coming to an understanding that all of this process takes time, and time is money. And that's for staff, for management, for agencies, for everybody to sort of understand that. And then to make this a standard part of RFPs, of budgets, of scopes, that sort of thing. The other element we talked about was really about basically collaboration, again, across different entities, whether that's cross-consulting collaboration to share things like context, different resources, but also to think about education, internships, the larger pipeline of how we get a more diverse group of folks interested and involved in
Thank you. That was great. We are going to document the notes, and we'd really invite you to take this survey. So you can scan the QR code. I think that Lindsey also may have put some QR codes out of the desks, but it might take about 5 to 10 minutes. Share what you want to in it, and if you want to stay connected, there's an opportunity for you to put your email address in there. We'd love to keep connecting with you all. And then if you're curious to learn a little bit more about this DEI think tank, want a chance to meet with other people who are really focused on how do we tackle this question, how do we advance our industry here, you can sign up on this sign-up sheet right here, or let us know through the survey. Either way, we'd love to hear from you. And thank you so much. So we have a few extra minutes. If you want to chat amongst yourselves, come chat with any of the facilitators. And a huge thank you to our note takers for all of your work.